Welcome to this very special live stream hosted by Uno AI. By the way, I said live stream. This session is completely live. So be sure to drop into the comments, drop into the chat wherever you're joining from. Let us know where you're joining us from. Right here, for me, I'm here in Austin, Texas. It is very hot, but would love to engage with you as we get through this stream. As the title suggests, this session is all about the hottest topic of 2023, the hottest topic of 2024, and as you may guess, is artificial intelligence. My name is Ron Eddings. I'm the CEO and executive producer at Hacker Valley Media, and I'm going to be helping us navigate through this topic of AI in regards to specialized intelligence. We're going to talk about how you can unlock 30x speed and 10x scale. Joining me, as always, we have Shashank Tavari, who is the CEO and co-founder at Uno. Shashank, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah, always fun to chat with you. Love this webinar series. I think the audience is also loving it. And I think primarily what I hear is it's because of the authentic conversations. A lot of people come back and say, "Hey, we get some good, valuable content," and so we'll do the same thing today. We'll stick to some good content, and have some good conversation. We'll try it.
Let's keep it coming. Let's keep it coming. As the title suggests, there's keywords that have been popping up in people's YouTube and people popping up in people's searches. AGI and ASI. There's artificial general intelligence, artificial specialized intelligence. We're going to be like leaning hard on the specialized intelligence, but I think it might be a good idea to set the stage and define both AGI and ASI. I'll let you take that one away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just spot on. I think everyone is talking about super intelligence, artificial intelligence kind of taking over the world, and acronyms and words like AGI and ASI becoming household acronyms, right? And
Yes.
I think it's really stemming from what I would say is the expectation that AI is really going to change our world. Now, at Uno, because we are one of those companies that is heavily invested in this domain of AI and has been building platform that is very AI native, we certainly have one of those as well who are extremely buoyant, extremely excited about the promise of AI. There's no two ways on that. But I think that what I like to do is I like to temper the overexcitement with reality. And the reason I like to do that is because I think that sometimes when we as humans get ahead of ourselves, even the good things then don't get valued as much because we are very disappointed with the extreme hype not really materializing, right? And so I just want to maybe with that lens, with that nuance, define AGI and ASI, and then lay out the foundation, if you may, for the conversation for today. Now, AGI, as the word is being used in the context of super intelligence, this absolutely smart, all encompassing, all knowing incarnation of AI that's going to do everything better than humans, right? Like that's what AGI is implying. Forget
Yep.
the technical definition. That's what it is there when you talk about in social media. That's what is the message, if you may, when Elon Musk goes up there and tweets and says, "Hey, AGI is coming next year," right? The listener at least is thinking super intelligence is coming. Now when super intelligence becomes the notion, people think one of the two things. One is that, oh my God, Terminator's in town. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
take over the world, and I'll become a piece of the rubble, right? Like that's one side of emotions, and the other side of the emotion is, oh, we're going to Mars sooner, and we'll be sitting on, if not on Mars, if on Earth, we'll be sitting on, the beaches of Hawaii all day and enjoying it, while the machines will do all the work, right? Like that's the kind of two ends of the spectrum.
Yep.
The reality though is that such a conceptualization of intelligence that is going to do everything that humans do today is very far away. Not even like far, but like very far away. And the reason for that very explicit sort of um, statement of very far away is because there's still a lot of technology, a lot of learnings, a lot of experimentation that needs to go into it to really make it possible. Now, the question is, will it become possible? Will we have super intelligence someday? I think we will. Is that someday next year or tomorrow morning? I don't think so. I think it's a few years away, right? And it'll go through its own iterations, just like every technology has. And we will reach there. We don't know how we'll reach there today. The current things that we have don't really allude to the fact or don't really point in the direction that we are reaching there anytime soon. That doesn't mean we can't come up with some newer techniques. That doesn't mean that we cannot conceive newer technology, because we have been conceiving newer technology every year, every month, every day. So we'll get there, but I think we're a little distance away from that. Now, bringing back more to the topic of ASI, or
Hmm.
specialized intelligence, this is where we are talking about machine intelligence in a specific domain, right? To be more sort of, pointed and targeted and specific, let's take a few examples. Can we have a machine that can conduct surgery like an expert surgeon? Can we have a machine, that can do some activities on the shop floor that humans do today with the precision of the best mechanic? Can we have a machine that can do some of the tasks in the enterprises that somebody with a lot of domain knowledge in that enterprise does today? Can a machine do that? And that
Right.
could be reconciliation of accounts, that could be, work within the cyber GRC world, that could be some marketing automation tasks, that could be, some of the financial planning, right? Or maybe, authoring certain pieces of a report, right? And so all of those specialized domain centric, high value, right, highly coveted sort of skilled tasks, can the machine do? I think yes, it can, right? And I think the reason it can do that is because of that limited domain specialization, because that's where the technology exists today. And that's
Hmm.
where we can go down deeper in that rabbit hole and make it even better over the next few days and weeks and months, and make it real, right? So that's, I think, the mental model one's got to think of: AGI versus ASI.
When I hear that definition, and also when I check out other resources, I know that you just had an article on Forbes. When I think of ASI, I think of expert systems. I feel like that's the closest analogy that many developers or people that build technology solutions think of. Like, oh, well, if I need experts to train this model, or if I need humans to curate it, what is the difference between a ASI and expert systems, and where's the benefit at?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So you are absolutely right that at the very fundamental level, ASI looks, feels, and perhaps realizes the dream of what expert systems tried to do, in the past and also over the last multiple years. The main difference, though, is that the approach to expert systems in terms of how we would train it, how we would use it, how smart it could become, what kind of tasks it could do, is slightly different when you look at ASI. So, for example, I think expert systems bordered more on rule based systems, to the extent that if something can be super well defined, it is, very sort of, logically and mathematically, sort of within the bounds of a tractable problem, like, do step A, and when step A completes, if it's success, go do step two, and, step two doesn't happen, go to step three. That kind of a very logical way of thinking, and you wanted to automate that out. A lot of the expert systems really meant to replace the human part of following those kinds of logical steps by a machine actually replicating it and doing it. And of course, there was some fuzziness in it, and there was some decision making in it, but it was more or less on the lines of a decision tree style decision making, with of course some fuzziness, right? Some entropy. The modern version of ASI, though, is talking about some level of thinking, some level of creativity, some level of human judgment, some level of dealing with imperfect or incomplete data sets. And that's where I think ASI is way more powerful, and a slightly different flavor, if you may, of what we thought or what we wanted to achieve with expert systems. But having said that, yes, it will maybe finally realize the dream that we had with expert systems, right? It will be very specialized, it will be very domain specific, it will not be general purpose, in the sense that a great surgeon won't be able to be a great cybersecurity analyst, or won't be able to be the smartest robotic cook, or the best sort of robotic machine tool, right? So they're all going to be just doing their thing in an excellent, thoughtful way, so to speak, with the word thoughtful, of course, in double quotes, what that means from a machine standpoint. Well, that's what the manifestation would be, right, from an ASI standpoint. But yes, it is bordering on that whole expert system notion. Anything that needs a lot of skill, a lot of expertise, will now sort of be doable with the machine.
Mhm. When someone hears the tagline of Uno, I think that you'll get inspired, you'll feel hope, and you know that this isn't a thing that's going to try to change your entire team. Like, you're still going to need your team, but it's going to enhance your team. And the tagline is to help every cybersecurity professional operate at the level of an expert. I think that's a very lofty, beautiful goal. And I think that it's possible because tools are getting better. I mean, as a cybersecurity practitioner, I've gotten better because of solutions. And bringing in AI, I think, is going to really take everyone to that next level. So when you look at something like GRC, for example, focus area of yours, uh, in what areas are we removing these tasks, or in what areas are do we need the help to operate at that level of an expert?
Yeah, it's a very good, thoughtful question there, Ron, because I think that you need to kind of think of the problem space first, right? And the problem space of GRC, as an example, or the cybersecurity at large, involves a lot of tasks that are, in some sense, very cumbersome, very time taking, very manual, even very haphazard sometimes. And the reason for that is because of the sort of unstructured data sets that sort of feed into these systems, the human judgment that becomes an important part of this sort of workflows, the variance or the nuances that are imposed on humans, situation to situation, right? And so if you start thinking about them, it's not like today, just as on date, every single individual out there is performing at 100% capacity. Like, that's something that is not true. And the reason for that is not even that there is a lack of effort. I think the analysts are making the effort, they're trying their best. However, because of all these other variables, right, because of all these other factors, it's very tedious, it's very mind numbing, it's very debilitating to the positive excitement and spirit that one starts the work with, right? What you end up really seeing is that you end up doing a lot of times the work which involves reading humongous pages of documents, or doing a lot of mind numbing mapping, or looking at lots of different pieces of evidence, and trying to map it back to what it is meant for, whether it's an audit or assessment, or proving that you have certain controls in place. Now, all these tasks of reading, classifying, parsing, mapping, right, or making some judgment on top of it, whether it's enough or not enough, is not the most exciting piece of work, honestly, today, right? And so the good parallel to draw with that is, if you look at industries that we are very familiar with, right? For example, construction on one side, right? Real estate, or for that matter, manufacturing on the other. I mean, these businesses 50 years and maybe some even 100 years ago, when they emerged in more sort of industrial style or large scale, were very manual, very mechanical. It was quite literally laying one brick at a time,
Hmm.
and I 100% sure, without knowing those people, because I'm sure they're long gone from the generation that we live in, they weren't really enjoying laying one brick at a time. That wasn't the funnest thing that they were doing in their lives, right? But they had to do it because that was the only technology of the times to build a house or to build a building. Now, fast forward with cranes and layout pieces, prefabrication, what have you, right? It hasn't made the life of a builder or the life of a construction expert redundant, has it? It has not. In fact, it's made
Hmm.
it more valuable, because now they're doing more skilled tasks,
Yep.
they're doing more fun tasks, they're doing things way beyond simply just struggling with laying the bricks. It's no more about just trying to at least make sure the wall stands up. That is not a problem. The wall will stand up, it's not a big deal. But now you are thinking about, how do I make it good from an ergonomic standpoint? How do I do in terms of vents and cooling? What can I do in terms of design? How do I do it and adapt it with the local weather? So I'm just drawing that analogy because look at where the movement is. The movement is from mundane, barely
Hmm.
struggling to lay the bricks out there to make sure the wall stands, to actually doing creative activity, fun activity, building nice stylish buildings which are also scientifically good, keep us cool, keep us warm, whatever the requirements may be, right? They're able to adapt to different kinds of usage, right? And
Hmm.
same thing you can draw a parallel in the world of GRC. Wouldn't you want to spend all your energy in actually upping up your risk posture game, right? The ability to go and look at all the controls at a given point in time and quickly make the assessments and see where the risks are so that you can go deeper into that specific sliver, right? And make sure that your compliance and risk effort that you make in actually kind of pays off. The ROI is high, because the whole reason for doing any of those governance, risk, or compliance efforts is to make sure that your risk posture is well maintained, that you understand where the risks are, that you manage them well, that you mitigate them well, that your enterprise is not being exposed to liabilities, threats, and issues that otherwise you may want to avoid, right? And so the focus moves from this mundane activity of mapping, reading, munging through stuff, classifying things day in and day out, right? Hours after hours, into more creative activity where you start actually looking at true analysis. You start looking at true value add. You start looking at, how does it affect my business impact or business process? So now you've kind of up leveled your game in a way, haven't you?
I'm bought in on the ASI, and it's especially because that construction analogy. When you look back in history, construction workers, it was very tedious, a little bit mundane. So you didn't necessarily need a level of skill to operate that machinery that's available today. Because someone with skills has to operate machinery, has to avoid injury, we pay them a little bit more. We compensate them for maintaining a deeper set of skills and a greater level of understanding of the project and how to build it as a whole. It's the same for cybersecurity practitioners. When we first got started, many people were systems administrators, and the salary was well under $100,000. Now,
Hmm.
the application security engineer, very specific, very specialized. That person, the average salary there, well over 100,000, depending on which state. Especially if you're in the Bay Area like yourself, getting an application security engineer is not cheap for a company and is very lucrative for the individual. I think ASI is going to continue to make positions more specialized, as the name indicates, but also up our level of skill so we're able to do more things besides laying bricks. When I think about laying bricks, I think of GRC teams, especially. There's a lot of tedious tasks, there's a lot of specialized tasks. When you look at the world of ASI and GRC, what's that aha moment where organizations or users say, "I gotta get Uno," or what's that moment where they think, this is gonna make my job in life much easier?
Yeah, the biggest simple aha moment is essentially one, the shift of focus. So if you think of, the task of cybersecurity and especially GRC, you can simplify it down or uplevel it to three types of, broad tasks. Doing, which is where all the stuff that we discussed so far comes in, right?
Hmm.
Collecting evidence, compiling them, mapping them, reading them, all that stuff, right? It's all doing, right? You got to first get your data sets in. Then there is a whole bit of reviewing, right? Where you're analyzing that all the stuff that you have put together and seeing, am I compliant, not compliant, where my risks are, what actions do I need to take, all that stuff, the reviewing part, right? And then the third part is really sort of implementing or correcting or remediating, right? Because the end goal is to make sure you manage your risk. That's what we're trying to do, right? So they're the three-step process of doing, reviewing, make sure what we did, we picked up the nuggets out of it, and then, acting on it, if you may, right? Like doing something that needs to be done to make sure that the game is, within our control and we are winning it. Now,
Yep.
today, the teams are totally frustrated, busy, and drowning in the doing, leaving very little time for the reviewing and the acting. So if you think of, a pie that is 100, 80 of that is going towards doing,
Hmm.
the 20 being split in some fashion between reviewing and acting, right? Now, what customers see when they start looking at what Uno can do is Uno automates out a ton of the doing. In fact, 80% of the doing gets automated out, right? Because the machine is able to do all that mundane work, which anyway people don't want to do. It's not like everybody's, fancying going in the morning to lay the bricks, right? Like nobody is like, really looking forward to it. So that is the aha moment. We're like, oh, really? So we'll be actually be able to focus our energies, right,
Yep.
more towards reviewing and acting and less of this mundane doing. And the machine not only takes over this task, it does it faster, right? What takes you 15 man months of effort gets done in 2 weeks. There's a radical, sort of, transformation in terms of time, and it does it more accurately, lo and behold, right? Why is that so? Because it's not getting tired like the humans. Once you've tuned the system and it's specialized enough, that's what the machines are good at. They can keep doing repetitive tasks with the same expectation, with the same performance, with the same, sort of overall variables, right? They're
Hmm.
not like humans. And that is also very important because, recently I just spoke to one of the CISOs, and quite literally, on Friday. And that gentleman mentioned that, one of the biggest parts of our third party risk management isn't even the mundane task, which of course nobody wants to do, but the variance, because we've got a team of about 10 people looking at that, and depending on the time of the day, the mood, the person, the energy level, we end up doing a third party risk assessment in a very different way. It's not even apples to apples. Sometimes you're too strict, sometimes you're too lenient, and everything else in the middle, right? So we're not even sure if we are doing that with the same level of consistency. Well, with the machine, that kind of a process is consistent. If it's 90% good, well, it's 90% good all the time, right? At least you know that for sure. So I think that's what excites them. That's the aha moment. Like, we can really start doing more of the things that matter, more of the things that are high value.
Where do we stand? This almost reminds me of the structured versus unstructured kind of idea, and I felt a little bit of competitiveness with machine learning and the earlier versions and iterations of AI. Now we have AGI and ASI. Is it AGI versus ASI? How do we think about these two, and how do we also make them work together?
Yeah, I don't think it's AGI versus ASI, by the way. I think ASI is a pathway to AGI.
Mm.
ASI will happen sooner. It'll be limited in terms of domain, capacity, intelligence, experience, and what we can accomplish. In some ways, it might be superior to AGI because obviously it will be an expert in a very specialized small sliver, right? As opposed to AGI, which would be broad general purpose smarts, if you may, right? So, but having said that, the experience we have as humans working with machines that are specialized, working with machines that are intelligent, that are human like, right? In limited domains, though, will pave the pathway to AGI, right? And that'll also, I think, in more than one way, lead to evolution of technology because there's lots happening at the research level where people are thinking about what does really human cognition and decision making mean. How can it be codified in a machine? Um, what does it mean with dealing with unknown situations that you've never been trained on, right? How would a machine behave in emergent behavior, and what does emergent behavior really mean, right? And how do we define it, how do we parameterize it? So there's a lot of that going on. So I do feel like, yeah, in very simple words, ASI is the pathway to AGI in my opinion. And of course, ASI is going to be more valuable from an enterprise and commercial standpoint today, right? Like, that's definitely the reality. Now, you mentioned another piece there which kind of skips me right now. You mentioned something else with intelligence and ASI, which is, um, I think you were talking about the productivity again. Just maybe remind me again what you just mentioned. So,
Yeah, no, I was asking, is it AGI versus ASI, or do they work together? Because like early in the machine learning days, there was like you could build a model, and it was like, am I going to build a structured model that's going to be using a structured ML algorithm or unstructured? And
good point.
with AGI, I almost see it being like an interface where you can ask it a general question, and then the AGI could figure out whether it wants to answer that general question or pass it to the expert. That's one of the ways that I could see AGI and ASI kind of playing together through agents.
Yeah, it's a little more nuanced there. Good point, good thinking, but a little more nuanced. I think both ASI and AGI are dealing with fuzziness, unstructured data, lack of rules. I think both live in that realm. It's a question of how wide can they go, right? So, think of it this way: ASI is a human-like, agent-driven system, if you may, right? That can think independently, make some decisions independently, conceptualize a few things, work with unstructured inputs, work in fuzzy situations, but within bounds. It can do things within a certain domain, within a certain realm. AGI, on the other hand, in terms of just as a concept, right, average general intelligence or artificial general intelligence, rather, is really saying, well, can we have the general intelligence that a human picks up, let's say a 5-year old um, has on their own? Can a machine manifest that? And which is why I say, like, I think that one we are very far away from, because even for a 5-year old, right? Who's definitely not domain trained on anything in most cases, unless you are,
Candy.
a child prodigy. Yeah, exactly. If like exactly, they just know those simple things. But having said that, they have this insane ability or unbelievable ability which we take for granted as humans because we all sort of live that world, so we don't think it's special, where you put them in unknown situations and they're able to make sense of it. You send them to a completely new location, new park, they'll be able to make sense and say, well, this is a play area and that I need to stay away from, and that's dangerous. They kind of sense it, right? And that's the whole human, just as an example, right? Like the
Mm,
human cognition aspect, where in an unknown situation that they've never encountered before, right? Or talking to strangers or looking at strange situations, even a 5-year old is able to, you know, conceptualize, articulate, understand, map to ideas or notions that they may have never been exposed to in the past, right? There is this amazing concept of being a human where you can really take new ideas and somehow relate to whatever you have seen so far, right? And maybe even things that you've never seen. Machines can't do that today, right? Like machines at the end of the day, yes, they can get creative, yes, they can do stuff, but it's all based on whatever they have been trained on, whatever they have been exposed to, whatever they have understood so far, right? Like this innate concept of cognition or completely
mm.
sort of first principles thinking or first principles conceptualization of ideas hasn't been observed yet. There is no technology that exists today. And truly speaking, AGI would map to that. AGI would map to that true human like ability to think on its own, right? Where the machine can kind of train itself and conceptualize itself. We're a little distance away from it, as I said earlier. But I think ASI, which is more still domain trained, right? It is some training inputs that have come in, but definitely it's smarter than a machine learning system that is, trained on structured inputs or, trained to do very specific tasks. It's a little more than that. In this case, ASI is certainly able to do a lot of unstructured tasks. It's actually good at doing unstructured tasks. It has demonstrates a certain level of creativity. It demonstrates decision making. It demonstrates understanding of concepts, right? It demonstrates sort of a tiered way of task execution in terms of if this happens, then do that, and it's able to conceptualize with unknown sort of states, if you may, right? So I think like it definitely is way smarter than a rule based system, way smarter than the traditional machine learning system, but it's still not as smart from a pure raw understanding or raw thinking, even as smart as a young child, right? There's still some distance away from it.
I wonder, you almost broke my heart in the beginning about AGI, ASI is actually further away than 1 year. Because I was betting on it, I was hoping on it, that Chat GPT would be able to do some of my full workflows next year. But if it's not 1 year by your estimate, when do you see ASI being true ASI?
Yeah, I think we'll see various incarnations of it. We'll see some of it come within the next year and get better over the following years. I do feel like, enterprise workflows, task execution, specialized domain specific things will become real with artificial intelligence. And if I just to give an example, like even what we do today, right? Like what we do at Uno today is sort of bordering now in the area of ASI. Why? Because a lot of the tasks within the small domain that we focus on, right? Governance, risk compliance, risk posture management, and the works, that same area, a bunch of the tasks can really be run on autopilot mode today, right? We don't promote that. And the reason we don't promote that is because we do see the system getting smarter and evolving even further. There's still a lot that needs to be done on emergent behavior, the right sort of incentives that come through decision making improving even further. But even today, a lot of that workflow automation, if you may, if you think about it, is achievable with a system like ours, right? But in a very specific domain, right? With high accuracy and with high levels of reliability, right? Because you could also automate that with a chat GPT type system today, but then, there is no guarantee of enterprise specific knowledge or no guarantee of accuracy and no guarantee of consistency, right? But in that becomes possible with an ASI. Now, having said that, the question is, can that transition over to an AGI quickly into something that I give nothing to? I don't even train, like an untrained piece. and which in other words would mean, can my GRC system that I've trained on and taught suddenly can do heart surgery? And the answer is no, it's not going to do that. Nowhere close to it. Please do not use, Uno for doing heart surgery. You're going to definitely die, right? So don't do it, right? It's as simple as that. And neither ChatGPT, right? So that's not happening. I think that's very far away. But yes, there would be somebody who would be building that heart surgeon, if you may. And there are a lot of robotics already in play that would start taking off a lot of the, things off the surgeon's plate,
Hmm.
and they would start making the surgeon again from a doer to a reviewer, perhaps, in the sense that they would only do the more complicated tasks, but the basic tasks of stitching and opening, which already the robots do quite a bit, by the way, in surgery. It's not even new, but robotic surgery is a thing, it's very common, but it's kind of managed, manipulated by the surgeon. Well, even that would become lesser and lesser, and yes, those will look like ASIs because they would be able to deal with many unstructured situations, right? And they'll be very valuable. I'll give you a very arbitrary example, if you may, right, where some technology ASI like that would become immensely valuable. As society, we are talking a lot about space travel lately, right?
Yep.
It is an interest as en masse has been revived. I think it was talked about a lot in the 1960s in the Cold War era because everyone was trying to race to go to the moon, and then it became less hip. It also
Hmm.
became too expensive. Nobody could fund it, right? So nobody was talking about space, I think, for a good 2 decades. It had become like, okay, we've gone to the moon, we've seen it, we've got satellites, now what, right? And then
Yep.
now we had this new revival of let's go to Mars. I don't even know if that's a good idea or not, but anyway, then that did pique everyone's interest. We also spoke about a lot more of the satellite technology being used in multiple different ways. And now there is also fun space travel, right? Like all this kind of space tourism. Now, with that, there is renewed interest, and now there is the idea like we should go out of our galaxy and go visit some other galaxy. Now, the moment you have such ambitions, the first problem that comes up is the human bounds. Like, hey, but we are not going to be alive for that long. Even if you figured out a way to live for 150 years, it would barely take us only a speck away from Earth, because things are too far away, a few light years away, and by then we'll be gone. So the humans can't live. So then there's a lot of work going on around, okay, how can we freeze humans or whatever, going into the realm of science fiction, and maybe we'll crack that someday, right? Like we'll figure that out. But then the next question comes, even if we figured out a way to do that and we started sending humans out who could somehow be alive for 300 years, let's just say we figured that problem, right? Like somebody figured that out. I don't know if you can, but let's say we figured it out. Well, now the questions will become, for that person who's going to be out 300 years, well, that person might fall sick or might need medical attendance. So, well, you'll also have to create a doctor who's going to be alive for 300 years and would be able to operate on these people. So that's asking for too much, because it's not only by just staying alive, but somebody who's in full capacity for 300 years. Well, maybe that'll get replaced by that robot. There'll be a robotic doctor, an ASI doctor, if you may, on your spaceship someday. And you will call on that ASI doctor, which is basically a machine that would operate on you as you figured out your space mission of, going far out into the far, far depths of the universe. All this sounds very science fictionish today, but I think, like, it'll start with more mundane enterprise type tasks, industrial, activities with local sort of sort of on earth difficult tasks, if you may, and some of it already gets done, things like underwater exploration, or scaling certain pieces, or lifting heavy things, or doing complex mundane tasks. I think that's where we start seeing ASI, but that will pave the path or transition towards this outstanding future that is in front of us.
I think it's always fun to relate AI with heart surgery because, in a way, you look at heart surgery as opportunity and risk. It's all about the probability of something happening, whether it's positive or negative, and then
Right.
what is the impact if that thing were to happen. And when I look at things like AI, I know it could help the enterprise the most. Like, for someone getting heart surgery, an individual, that opportunity and risk is going to be, maybe for someone that is, a worker bee, not a super rich entrepreneur like Elon Musk, 100,000 to $1 million in opportunity and risk, right? If they were to pass, that's a kind of a different thing. But if they were to live, there's going to be an opportunity because they get to go on and live for longer, make money, but then they also have to pay a bill. And I look at the same for enterprise AI. Like if you do it right and you have a system that works, it's very lucrative, hundreds of millions of dollars. Or you could also suffer a breach if you're applying AI to GRC, for example, and that probability of a positive impact's not high enough. Why is the enterprise ready or not ready for ASI in the terms of GRC?
No, I think, see, for the world of GRC, I feel like it is the best gift they could get at this point in time, right? And the reason for that is, um, leave aside ASI or AI for that matter for the moment, right? Last couple of decades, the amount of workload, the amount of expectation, the amount of variables, and the amount of just pressure on those teams has increased. That's just a story. That's just a reality. Now, why has
Hmm.
that happened? Because we have more laws in that realm, right? Regulatory pressure has increased. We have more accountability. Everyone's asking, right? Now, in fact, from SEC to private bodies to investors to, like in every state law, everybody's saying, hey, tell us what you're doing. What was breached? What controls did you have? Like what precautions did you take? A lot more accountability, right? And then the third part is the realm has expanded beyond plain good old cyber. And when I say plain good old cyber, is like, hey, I protected my network, I protected my couple of things, I'm good to go, right? Like that's not the case anymore. Now we're saying, well, what are you doing about privacy, right? How are you managing this with your third party that you actually share data with? What are you doing with in terms of your own controls? Are you sampling them? Is your sampling a good strategy? Are you looking at some random stuff that doesn't even matter? Are you looking at everything? um, how are you managing your risk with respect to what you're claiming from a compliance standpoint, and what you're really doing, right? Because you say one thing in terms of your reports and audits and assessments, which tend to be a little bit more detached in most cases from what really happens in the enterprise, right? And so the pressures increased immensely. So now the question is, how do you scale to that requirement? Now you can scale to that requirement, right, doing two things. Either you can throw more people at the problem, or you can find ways to automate it. It's as simple as that, right? Now, people have been, our leaders have been throwing people at the problem, which is why if you go to a large bank, a Fortune 500 company, you wouldn't be surprised that one way or the other, there are like hundreds of people working on GRC, right? Question is that going to still scale, right? And will they not suffer from the same problems of inconsistency, cumbersome work, skill sort of variance, so on and so forth, right? And the answer is yes. So now the question is, okay, how about automation? What can
Hmm.
we do with automation? And so if you look at the last 10, 15 years, companies have invested in that space, but the automation there has really meant workflow automation, which in other words means automate away things around humans. Somebody is going to read it, update something, then from there it'll go to the next person who will review it or reconcile it, so on and so forth. It's kind of like an assembly line, if you want to draw an analogy. It's like people sitting in various stages, steps of the assembly line, right? And those pieces of paper or information or screenshots and documents and regulatory inputs and evidence and what have you, is that sort of material being passed in assembly line from person to person. Fair enough, it's at least has streamlined some record keeping, it has streamlined some of the work, it has automated away at least some of the absolutely low level rule based things that we are not doing anymore, right? So yes, we are not doing the bricklaying brick by brick, but we are still not using smart machinery to go measure out and see what the capacities are, or auto lay the bricks, or use smart things like cranes when you are 10 floors up top, right? We are still doing things in a fairly mundane workflow type manner. And so the key question is, where do we go from here? Can we automate it any further? And if we can't, why can't we automate it any further? And the reality is, we can't automate it any further because now you start getting into the realm of things that humans can do well, but machines can't, or at least the prior generation of machines can't, which means you have to make some judgment call. It's nuanced, it's not black and white, there's a gray zone, right? You look at a particular screenshot as an example, and a screenshot is something that is depicting a system's proof, if you may, against a particular control. And say the control was, we have MFA all across our organization. Let's say this was a control, right? And you took a screenshot of your identity system or wherever you have your MFA enabled. And now, how is the machine going to make sense of it unless it can, like a human, read that screenshot, make sense of that screenshot, and reconcile against the expectations. It can't do that today without AI. But with AI, it can. And it does exactly. And in fact, Uno, we can do that quite smoothly and effortlessly. And this is exactly what a human does. A human would look at the screenshot and say, oh, okay, yeah, I see it. It's turned on. All the admin users are turned on. You'll go back and say, yes, this particular control is implemented. And I think things look good. The risk is managed. But you cannot do that today using the workflow technology. And so you need humans for it. And so again, you run into the scaling issues, right? So going back to your question, are enterprises ready for it? I don't know whether they're ready or not. They need it. Let's put it that way, right?
Oh
And so
yeah.
the moment they see that benefit, it's like, yeah, why didn't I have it yesterday? Is basically how they react to it. Then of course it becomes a process of how do we bring it in? Let's make sure we don't just scramble through it, but have a deliberate plan. All those good things. But yeah, I think they're very ready from a need standpoint. They desperately need it. It's the need of the hour.
Part of that need, from what I've heard throughout the cyber community, especially, we were just at RSA. I was asking many people, including yourself, about what are the use cases of AI. Everyone's, when they were talking about their top use case for AI in cyber, they all mentioned that the adversary is using AI as well. And the
Hmm.
only way that we're going to be able to keep up with the pace of threats is by also using some of their tooling. Like we use the adversary tools. Like some adversaries, when I first got started, use Metasploit. So defenders started to understand Metasploit, where the network calls and whatnot. And I think it's the same for AI. Like we have to start to understand how the attackers are using it, because that is a defense mechanism. I wonder though, who's going to be the big winner? Because adversaries are adopting, enterprises are starting. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a good question, and I think the verdict is still open. We don't know, right? Um, but I'm with you. I don't think adversaries will not use this technology. Just broader from our tax standpoint, it actually makes their life easier. They have to do less. They can scale as well, right? They can basically outsource some of the things that they otherwise have to do as humans. Right, the same sort of the fuzziness in human decision making and attacks, right? Situational sort of decision making. We will certainly see the rise of AI in adversarial behavior, right? Question though is, I wouldn't really worry too much about it. I would say yes, keep that on your, keep that on your radar. It is your rear view mirror, if you may, right, or the
Hmm.
side mirror. Make sure you don't sway away from your lane and crash. So certainly keep an eye out for it. And if somebody is like, um, you know coming at a huge speed right behind you, you kind of manipulate, right, like do what you need to do. That's basically how I would say adversarial action, but your eyes got to be ahead on the road, right? And what I mean by that is, leave aside the adversary. If there was no adversary, even today there are so many inefficiencies that you got to go tidy that up, right? You got to up your game anyway. But because cyber, and I would say a little bit of GRC also, more than adversary, also expectation is your adversary in some cases, is driven by that. Like it's a unique field in that sense, right? Like it's sort of war at all times, right? And so you are aspiring to establish peace by better defenses. Like that's basically kind of what's going on. I do feel that, yeah, you've got to adopt it. You've got to go fast,
Hmm.
and don't wait for the adversary to show up and do things, because I'm sure they're doing it already. Because that's their opportunity, right? They can scale and run more malicious behavior using the same technology, and why won't they? Right? It reduces their costs. They have better ROI with it, so they will definitely run for it. Well, you up your own ROI, go for it too.
And speaking of ROI, I think it would only be right if we spoke a little bit about ASI and ROI at Uno. There's not many places that you can go for ASI, especially in the world of GRC and cybersecurity. I feel like Uno is the one, the number one. So for anyone that's watching this live or catching the replay, maybe they work in GRC. What are what things should they look forward to before speaking to you and speaking to the team at Uno AI, and what should they expect for ASI?
Yeah, well, I think you said it. By the way, I love that little thing of uno is the one, which quite literally means that in Spanish. But and that was our inspiration for the name, right? Like being that one that solves your problem.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, coming back to the pertinent question, like what should the buyer look for? What should the organization look for? I would say forget uno for that matter. I think what you've got to ask as a question is, what can I do to get that 30x speed and 10x scale gain, right? And why is that required? Because all the things that we discussed, right? The expectations are level, there's just too much going on. It's very difficult to scale with humans, but the need of the hour is to scale 30x in terms of speed, do things faster, and do that at a larger scale, like do more. And on top of it, in the current setup, there's also expectation to do that with fewer resources in most cases. There is also expectation to up level everybody who you already have. And then, of course, last but not the least, do that with a very high level of accuracy. You cannot just throw that in a commercial LLM and hope for the best, because that might actually be worse off, right? Because if you do that, you might be taking on undue amounts of risk, and the accuracy and hallucination, etc., might actually be might put you in a worse situation, right? So you want something that you can rely on, enterprise grade, if you may, right? And so if you have other ways of doing it, go for it, I would say. I mean, I'm not aware of anything out there that does that today besides CSI and besides what we have put together. And I have no doubts that this industry will evolve and we'll start seeing a lot more players come through. But I feel like, if that's something that you're aspiring for, and I think you should aspire for it, because there is no other way that you can solve the problem unless you figured out, some other magic wand. Um, Come talk to us. And I think the way we do it, we, in fact, with every customer, and it's a very interesting exercise for us as well. Whenever we start talking to a customer, we say, well, do not believe us. Which sometimes they're like taken aback. What do you mean? Like, aren't you? I say, well, this is new technology. You got to experience it.
Hmm.
With anything new, the best way to believe is experience. Because with anything new, it's hard to conceptualize what the benefits could be, how it would manifest, until you experience it. And so that's why I say, well, let's do a proof of concept or a proof of value. And it's quick. It's not like you have to invest lots of time, energy, money, or anything like that. But I just feel like I think that really gets them thinking. And 9 out of 10 cases, what we've seen is when they go through that experience, they actually come back and say, oh, wow, you know what? We can also do this. And that's lovely for us as well, because on our mission, we don't claim at any points in time that we know all the different use cases or all the different ways that this technology can impact and make the user's life better, make the enterprises more productive, right? So it's a great learning moment for us as well, right? Where they come back and then they really get excited, because I think in at some level, seeing is believing, experience is believing, and it gets the creative juices flowing, and companies are like, why didn't I have this 5 years ago?
Yep.
Why am I doing what I'm doing? So that's what I would encourage. That's the best way to do it with any new technology, for that matter.
If you don't get excited by generative AI and cybersecurity, I feel bad because there's a lot of opportunity coming. And for those that do, which is everyone, let's be honest, and also those that are fascinated and inspired by GRC Copilot, you got to check out Uno AI. Like Shashank was saying, Uno is the one. So I would highly recommend you to head over to uno.ai. Also, check out the Uno LinkedIn page. That's where you can find events like this. Also, you can find Shashank's profile. Be sure to follow it. And we also dropped a link in the comments for Shashank's most recent Forbes article too. Highly recommend to check that out and join the wait list after you visit the Uno AI website, because getting access to this tech could change everything. Shashank, always a pleasure to jump on the ones and twos and do a live with you. Also, thank you to the audience for spending some time with me and Shashank. Remember, check out Uno AI. And with that, we will see everyone on the next live stream.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks everyone for joining us.